There's nothing quite like a fresh cup of coffee to get the heart started. I'm going to be using coffee to get my art started. Get it? Because it's like a play on word, pun. Alright, I'll stop. G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza, and for today's art challenge I'm going to create a piece of art on this piece of paper using nothing but coffee. So I'm going to get started by brewing a bunch of different coffees in different levels of saturation and play around with a few samples on paper and sort of get some ideas brewing from there. Get it? Brewing? Okay, I'll stop. I am so sorry. For this challenge, I'll be using JAZZA'S espresso coffee mix, partially because it's a really rich mix, so I should be able to get really dark colors, but mainly because I can do this to the packet. Presenting to you the JAZZA Cafe Espresso Coffee Mix. Booyah, baby! I'll also be using a coffee plunger, some instant coffee, paper filters to make sure none of the grains get through, and some miscellaneous little cups. I wanted to make a few different coffee mixes just so I had some different tones to work with. One of my first mixes that I put to the side is just a regular mix of plunged ground coffee. Then next I wanted to make as rich a mix as possible, and I used like a quarter of the packet and only got this teeny tiny cup of really intense rich dark coffee, which is the darkest I could possibly get. Went forward and played around with a bunch of different coffee mixes, getting a really light mix, playing around with instant coffee, and then mixing some milk in with one of the other instant coffees. And then last but not least, I used pretty much the rest of the packet of my espresso coffee with as little water as possible so that it would be as saturated as possible, and let it mix and soak and absorb as much of the color as possible for as long as possible until I divided it into 2 glasses and let it drip. And very slowly but surely give me the richest mix of coffee possible, 1 drop at a time. After about 15 minutes of letting this stuff drip, I ended up with a very small cup of the most intense black coffee I have ever seen. And now with a variety of different mixes and levels of saturation of coffee, I brought in the paper that I intended to use and put down a few swatches just to get an idea as to how it absorbs and the color and tone that they leave. So this is a page with some sample swatches from the coffee brews that I have made here. So the top 2 are the ground coffee beans. We have one less saturated. You can see this one here is painted on the right and it's barely visible. Now that it's dried, it does have a nice sort of look about it, so I could use it over broader areas perhaps. And then this more medium saturated coffee does get a bit more of a solid look there. But these, much like watercolors, are going to be most useful to layer. So that is not the darkest we will be able to get. Hopefully I'll be able to build things up and maybe get some gradients, get some cool looks happening. The other thing I learned when I was putting these swatches down is it takes a while to dry. So I brought along my wife's hairdryer and I'm just going to help it along a bit. I guess I need to be gentle because you can see it's pushed the water a bit. So I'm going to go top down on a low setting. You can also see from using the blow dryer, it's sort of pooled it out at the edges there, so I need to be careful of that. This here, as you can see, is the most intense mix, which took quite a lot of coffee to get that dark. But it is going to be the most useful for me because it's going to layer in the most saturation and add the most intensity, but still it's kind of hard to get a really solid look. These are the instant coffee mixes. On the right we have one with a little bit of milk, and on the left we have one which is just the instant coffee. It's interesting because the top 2 look much more watery, whereas the bottom 2, the instant coffee ones, do have a more solid feel. I have no idea how these are going to look working in with each other, if it's going to look cool and solid or be really hard to make anything worthwhile. But I have my materials, I have my sample swatches, so I have an idea as to how it might work. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get started on my coffee art challenge. Wish me luck. I start off with a very small brush and my lightest coffee saturation and go ahead with a bit of a sketch, basically laying down a bit of a composition down on the paper. I had the idea that I wanted to work with a more oriental, traditional looking design, something in a landscape form so I could get a really natural and organic look, and something that looks quite old, maybe some ancient hidden temples or something that feels kind of zen and mysterious. As I expected, even putting down that sketch took quite a while to dry, so the next thing I did was I duct taped my hairdryer. I used a mic boom arm off in the corner and left it on pretty much for the entire time moving forward, painting the rest of my image. Now I gotta say, moving forward, the time-lapse portion of this video is the most satisfying of any video I've ever done. It's so cool seeing the coffee and the water and paper all mix and dry together, all sped up. You can see it really come to life. The first thing I did is block out some of the tones in the piece, starting off with a medium and light tone, creating a sense of distance, blocking in some of the silhouettes and roughly putting in some cloud shapes in the sky with my really light color. And then slowly but surely it just became a matter of layering and slowly creating silhouettes and shapes. Obviously the distant mountains are going to be the lightest, but as we get closer to the foreground and the midground, I start to use the darker and more intense mixes of coffee, and I layer in more and more of these tree shapes, creating a really cool aesthetic of rolling hills, slowly heading off into the distance. I wanted the temple in the midground to look really cool and clean and have a bit of a different aesthetic to the rest of the piece, particularly that being that it has more detail and feels a bit more solid. So I go in first and block in some of the major shapes and try and keep things really clean, and I intend to come back to the temple over time and add more detail and clean shapes and lines just to make sure it feels a little bit more solid and man-made. I come back to the sky several times throughout the course of my painting because I'm using the lightest possible color, and it's going to take a while to create the aesthetic of clouds that I'm going for. And the whole process is a little bit of back and forth because the layers take a bit to dry, especially when I put down larger areas of tone. Whether it be light or dark, it still takes quite a while for it to completely dry. So while the sky is drying, I head back into the foreground and create a tree that's slightly in front of the temple, then head into the midground and add some texture to the distant mountains until that tree's dry enough to come back and add a little bit more texture and darker tone, and I sort of cycle like that back and forth between the layers as I build it up. Next I want to build up the clean detail in the temple, so with a very small brush and a medium tone of coffee I go in and roughly draw in some tiles and textures throughout the temple's structure, and then while that dries head back to other areas of the image that I really want to solidify and intensify the tone in. With the details having been laid down on the temple image, I come back and add as much intensity and contrast as possible, in particular the areas that are undercover and in shadow, and in areas that are bathed in shadow I really heavily lay in the darkest mix of coffee I have, hopefully so that it can build up and really solidify into an intense shadowed area. I wanted to add a feature in the sky, so I tried to create a bit of a moon or sun silhouette through the clouds. I tried to do this with a little template I used, and while it dried in between layers I went with a small brush and added some birds off in other areas of the sky. But as I tried to build up the layers in this sun or moon silhouette and then removed the template, I could see that it wasn't looking very clean at all. So I cleaned up outside the edges as much as possible. It did stain a little bit, but that's okay because I just added some hand-painted intensity and cleaned up the edge as much as possible. And I did end up with a silhouette and shape in the sky that I thought worked well enough. Last but not least, I came back to my temple and wanted to add a final layer of refinement, polish, and sharpness. I went also through the textures that I'd laid down and added some slight variations and flaws, which I think makes a piece look more interesting and realistic. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, and this is technically the result of my coffee art challenge. I say technically because there are a couple of things I want to do to sort of really wrap it up and make it feel like a fully finished piece, but that don't involve coffee. So I thought I'd just pause here, show you the final result, and let you know I'm really happy with how it turned out, but I do want to do a couple of little tweaks, and one is to add some little highlights with a white pen. At the moment, the moon or sun or whatever it's meant to be looks a little bit like a Death Star, so I think maybe adding a rim might make it look like a cool solar eclipse sort of thing or something. I don't know. It also might ruin it, so that's another reason I'm pausing here. And then the very last thing I want to do is burn the paper, specifically the edges, and maybe stain a little bit of the paper here and there with a little bit of smoke or something. I remember when I was a teenager in some of my high school projects, I occasionally would try and make a really old piece of paper for a project, and I would stain it with coffee and I would burn it. Doing that with this piece, a little bit of burn, a little bit of fraying around the edges, and a little bit of a scrunched up texture could make it look like a really cool old piece of art, and I do want to do that. But this is the result of the coffee art challenge, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Before I move on to those finishing touches though, I've been tempted by the smell of coffee this whole time. So as a reward for myself and to satiate my lust for coffee, thought I'd mix it all together and enjoy my own unique post-artwork brew of JAZZA'S fresh coffee. It's just how I like it. Tastes like creativity. First thing I did is went through with the white pen and added some dots to the trees to make it look perhaps like cherry blossoms. They weren't going down on the paper very well, and also when I put some white out around the sun/moon silhouette to try and create an eclipse effect, I realized I wasn't a huge fan of the white on this paper and the coffee mix. It felt a little bit too garish and a little bit too harsh, but hey, I was committed at this point, so I just went with it. With all of that done, my piece was a little bit shiny and glossy from all of that coffee that had dried. It had a bit of a sheen to it, plus the whiteout looked a little unnatural compared to the rest of the piece. So I took it outside and rubbed dirt all over the paper, and then with a barbecue lighter, I singed around the entirety of the piece, creating a really cool burnt edge effect, and then went throughout the middle of the piece and scrunched it up and added some various burn marks, smoke stains, and then for good measure, rubbed the whole thing in dirt one last time. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This is a finished result of my coffee art challenge. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm really happy with the way it turned out. I'm not a huge fan of the whiteout stuff there, but it's a bit subtle in the end, especially with the burning and the mud and all that stuff happening. I really like that old ancient look. I think it looks really cool and really authentic. What do you think? Do you like this one, or do you like the version I showed you before without the burns and without the whiteout? I'm really interested to know your thoughts. I'm going to put a poll in the card, ladies and gentlemen. Go vote. I'm interested to know if you prefer this piece or the other piece without all the burns and the whiteout and stuff when it was just coffee. Anyways, all that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe for more art here on Draw with Jazza. We have so much fun on Draw with Jazza. We have challenges and competitions. Sometimes I do tutorials, sometimes I do VR, sometimes I do sculpting, sometimes I do painting and drawing. Man, we just have so much fun here. So if you're interested in more fun with art, make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell notification button so you can be here first. Hey, I'm not your dad. I'm not going to tell you what to do. That would be really rude. But that being said, if you enjoyed this video, maybe you'll enjoy a video I did last week and created a piece using only Sharpies. You know these Sharpie things, but I use different colors, not just the black ones. So I'm going to put a link to that in the card and in the description so you have something else to watch. Not that you don't have anything else to watch. I should probably stop drinking coffee. You know what they say, don't drink your art supply. I mean own supply, not art supply. But it is my art supply because I made this with coffee. I suppose I should say if you're going to watch more videos and subscribe to Draw with Jazza, I would be very careful because the Jazza brand is really strong. Thanks so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. That's it for now, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later. Make sure to subscribe to my channel to see more of my videos. And while you're at it, check out my shop where I sell ebooks, brushes, photo references, video courses, and more. There's another video you might enjoy from my channel over there, and you can also check out my behind the scenes daily vlog channel, Daily Jazza. That's it for now, and until next time, I'll see you later.